The wind howled fiercely as it swept through the shattered mountains, sending flurries of snow into the air. The land around was a frozen wasteland, quiet except for the occasional gust of wind that whistled through the craggy peaks. In the heart of this icy wilderness, two ancient dragons lay on the ground, their immense bodies sprawled across the snow-covered valley. They had not moved in days, their wings folded tightly against their sides, their once mighty claws now buried in the snow. Zarathus, the elder of the two dragons, opened one tired eye, his vision blurred from age and weakness. His body, once vibrant with fire and strength, now felt cold and heavy. He had been alive for centuries, but this curse had stripped him of his power. The weight of time pressed down on him, and the only thing that seemed certain was that he was nearing the end. Beside him lay Zivra, a younger dragon but still old enough to have seen decades pass by in a blur of forgotten battles and endless suffering. Her wings were tattered and torn, her scales dulled and worn. She too had felt the sting of the curse that bound them both, forcing them to remain in this desolate land. The curse had drained them of their strength, and now they were nothing more than two forgotten beings, lying in wait for an end that never seemed to come. Zarathus shifted slightly, his heavy breathing visible in the cold air. "Zivra!" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "How much longer do you think we can last like this?" Zivra's eyes opened slowly, her gaze flicking to her companion. Her voice was faint, but she managed to speak. "I don't know. The cold is getting worse, and the curse, it's draining what little strength we have left." The two dragons had been trapped here for what felt like an eternity, bound by magic and fate. Long ago they had been powerful creatures, feared and respected by many. But now they were nothing. They had no more enemies to face, no battles to win, only this endless suffering. Zarathus's yellow eyes narrowed as he looked around, scanning the snowy landscape. There was no sign of life, nothing but endless white stretching in every direction. It was a lonely, miserable existence, but then something caught his attention, a movement small and distant. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him, but as the figure drew closer, it became clearer. Someone was coming, a human. Zarathus blinked in disbelief. Who would be foolish enough to travel through this frozen wasteland? The storms that often ravaged this valley were enough to bury even the toughest of travelers, let alone one who might stumble across two ancient dragons. Zarathus and Zivra had long since given up on expecting anything from the outside world. They had been forgotten by time, left to wither away in the cold. But here was a human walking steadily toward them, seemingly unaffected by the harsh environment. Zivra's sharp eyes squinted against the wind as she studied the figure. "A human?" she muttered. "What is one of them doing here? They are not built for this kind of cold." Zarathus watched in silence, intrigued and confused. The human was alone, their steps purposeful as they moved through the snow, one foot after another, not slowing down. They wore a thick cloak, the fabric barely visible beneath the snowflakes that dusted their shoulders. But their posture was confident, not the stumbling movements of someone who was lost or afraid. Zivra snorted, her voice low. "Perhaps they have a death wish." Zarathus turned his head, trying to gather enough strength to rise. "I don't know. There's something strange about them." The human was getting closer now, their figure becoming more distinct. Zarathus could see their face, young and determined, their features sharp and resolute despite the freezing temperatures. It was almost as if they had come here for a reason, not just to wander aimlessly. "I don't think they're afraid," Zarathus mused. "They are approaching us as though they know we're here." "But why?" Zivra shook her head. "It makes no sense. No human could survive in this cold without fear. There is something wrong with this." As the human reached the dragons, they stopped a short distance away, standing tall and unafraid. The wind howled around them, but they didn't flinch. They just stared at the two dragons, eyes calm, almost knowing. Zarathus studied the figure carefully. Despite the cold and the harsh winds, there was no fear in the human's eyes. In fact, they seemed curious, almost as if they were expecting to find something here. He had never seen a human with such a gaze, one that seemed to pierce through the usual fear and doubt that came with facing two dragons. "Who are you?" Zarathus called out, his voice weak but still carrying across the snow. "What brings you to this forsaken place?" The human tilted their head slightly as if considering the question. Then they spoke, their voice clear and strong despite the storm. "I've come to help you." Zarathus blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. "Help us?" he repeated, his voice thick with skepticism. "We are beyond help. This land has long since taken everything from us. There is nothing you can do." The human smiled, a small but determined smile that somehow made Zarathus feel a flicker of hope, a feeling he had not felt in ages. "You may think that, but you are wrong. I have come because I know who you are, and I know what has bound you here. I can set you free," Zivra growled softly, her voice tinged with doubt. "How could you possibly know of our curse, human? You are nothing but a child compared to us." The human's gaze didn't waver. "I know more than you think, and I have the means to break the chains that hold you." For a moment the dragon said nothing. Zarathus looked at Zivra, then back at the human. Something about this person, this small fragile being, felt different. Maybe it was the certainty in their voice, or the strength in their eyes, or maybe it was just the fact that after so many years of waiting, they had finally found someone who was not afraid. Zarathus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of time pressing on him once more. "If you truly believe you can help, then show us," he said, his voice carrying a rare note of curiosity. The human nodded, stepping closer to the two dragons. The storm howled louder, but the figure seemed unmoved, their eyes fixed on the dragons as though they were seeing something no one else could. Zarathus felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth spreading from deep within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human might be the answer they had been searching for. The human stood still, gazing at the two dragons with an unshakable calm. The howling winds raged around them, yet they didn't seem bothered. The cold, sharp enough to freeze even the most seasoned traveler, barely touched their face. It was almost as if the human didn't feel the chill of the world around them. The snow continued to fall in thick, swirling gusts, but it only added to the strange aura that surrounded this person. Zarathus watched the human, his yellow eyes filled with confusion. The figure's presence was like a light piercing through the storm, something the dragons hadn't seen in centuries. How could this small creature possibly think they could help them? And yet, there was something about the way they stood, how they looked at the two dragons with an air of knowing, that made Zarathus hesitate. Zivra growled, her voice low and wary. "This is madness. What could a human possibly do for us? We are bound by a curse older than any of them." The human turned slightly toward Zivra, their gaze unwavering. "I can break the curse that binds you," they said firmly, their voice full of certainty. "I can free you both from this prison." Zarathus blinked, taken aback by the words. For centuries they had been trapped here, imprisoned by an ancient magic that drained them of their power. No one had come to help. No one had even remembered their existence. Now a human, fragile, weak in comparison to their own kind, claimed to have the knowledge to break that curse. "Why would you help us?" Zarathus asked, his voice rough from the years of disuse. "Humans have forgotten us. We are nothing but a tale in your history books, a story to scare children. What would you gain from freeing two dragons?" The human met his gaze directly, their eyes full of something Zarathus had not seen in a long time. Compassion. "You are not forgotten," they said, their voice soft but steady. "And you have not been abandoned. I have come because I know what you were before this curse, and I know the truth of what has kept you here." Zivra's eyes narrowed, her doubt evident. "You know nothing of us. You do not understand what we have been through." "I understand more than you think," the human replied, stepping closer, their feet leaving deep prints in the snow. "I know the history of your people. The curse that binds you was not meant to last forever. You were protectors once. You were guardians of the land and the skies. But greed and betrayal turned everything to dust." Zarathus felt a stir in his heart at the human's words. He had heard echoes of that history, bits and pieces of what they had been before the curse took hold. A time when dragons had been revered, when they had soared through the skies, feared and respected by all. But those days had long passed. The betrayal, the curse, it had stripped them of everything they once were. Zivra shook her head. "How can you know all of this? How do you know the truth of what happened to us?" The human did not answer immediately. Instead, they knelt down in the snow and pulled something from their bag, a small smooth stone glowing faintly with an inner light. The stone was carved with strange symbols, ancient runes that none of the dragons recognized. The human held the stone in their hands, their fingers tracing the symbols as they spoke. "The curse was cast long ago by those who feared your power," the human said, their voice quiet, almost reverent. It was not meant to kill you but to bind you, to keep you from interfering with the world that humans were building. But the magic that holds you is not perfect. It was created with fear, not understanding. Zarathus's eyes narrowed as he watched the human closely. And you think this stone will break the curse? The human nodded. It can. But first you must face the truth. The curse can only be broken if you remember who you were before it began. Zivra's wings fluttered in agitation. Face the truth? What is this nonsense? We were betrayed, cursed, and left to die. What else is there to remember? There is more, the human said, their voice steady like a whisper of hope. Before the betrayal, before the curse, you were something greater. You protected the land, the people. But in the end, those who sought power turned against you. They saw you as a threat. They feared what you represented. Zarathus's heart stirred with memories he had long buried. He remembered a time when dragons had been more than just creatures of destruction. They had been keepers of the balance, guardians of the natural world. But all that had been lost in a single moment of betrayal. You speak of things we have long forgotten, Zarathus said slowly. The pain of betrayal, the loss of everything we once had. It is not something easily remembered. The human stood and walked closer to Zarathus, their eyes filled with an understanding that the dragon had never expected. I know it is not easy, but you cannot be free unless you face what you once were. Only then can you move forward, and only then will you be able to break the chains that hold you. Zivra hissed, her tail twitching with frustration. And what do you want from us, human? Do you think we will just suddenly forgive and forget the past? Do you think the power of your stone will erase centuries of pain? The human did not flinch at her words. They simply held out the glowing stone. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't ask you to forget. I ask you to remember. Remember who you were, not what you have become. Then you will have the strength to break the curse. Zarathus's mind was in turmoil. Could this be true? Could remembering their past, facing the truth of their former selves, actually be the key to breaking the curse? For centuries, the dragons had been trapped in this frozen wasteland. Their power drained, their spirits broken. But the humans' words, their promise of freedom, were like a flicker of light in the dark. With great effort, Zarathus lifted his head, his gaze focused on the stone in the human's hands. The power of the stone seemed undeniable, as though it held the key to everything they had lost. But would it truly work? I cannot promise you that we will succeed, Zarathus said, his voice low but full of resolve. But I will face the truth. I will remember. Zivra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I will too. If there is even a chance of breaking this curse, we must try. The human smiled, their face soft with encouragement. Then we begin. Together. With those words, the human placed the stone against the ground between the two dragons. The wind howled louder as a strange energy began to build around them, the stone glowing brighter. Zarathus and Zivra closed their eyes, each of them bracing for what was to come. The past would be unlocked, the truth would be remembered, and for the first time in a long while there was hope. The storm seemed to pause as the human placed the glowing stone between the two dragons. A faint hum filled the air like a soft breeze through the trees, but this sound was far different. It carried with it an energy, an ancient power that seemed to awaken something deep within the dragons. Zarathus felt it first, a warmth, unlike the cold that had numbed his body for so long. His scales, which had been dull and lifeless, seemed to stir under the influence of the stone. He could feel his breath coming easier, the weight of the years lifting ever so slightly. But it was only a hint of something greater. He could feel the stone pulling at him as if it was searching for something inside him, a memory, a truth buried deep within his heart. Zivra, too, felt the pull. She shifted uncomfortably, her wings twitching as if trying to stretch after being confined for too long. She had always been the more skeptical of the two dragons, but now even she could feel the power of the stone. It was as though the stone knew them, knew their pain, their history, their curse. What is this feeling? Zivra growled softly, her voice shaky. I've never felt anything like it. Zarathus slowly opened his eyes, his yellow gaze fixated on the stone. It's the magic, he said, his voice filled with awe. It's trying to reach us. The human stood a few steps back, watching silently, their eyes focused on the stone as if waiting for something. They didn't speak, but the look on their face was one of calm certainty. They had known this moment would come. They had known what the stone could do, but what would it unlock? And more importantly, would it truly set them free? The winds had died down completely, leaving a strange stillness in the air. The only sound now was the faint hum of energy that seemed to grow stronger as the stone pulsed with light. Zarathus could feel the energy building inside him. It was not like the fire he had once known, but it was something else, a pull that reminded him of his old self, when he had flown through the skies, powerful and unchallenged. Memories began to flicker in his mind. He saw flashes of his youth, back when the world was different and the dragons were revered by all. There were images of great battles, dragons soaring high above the clouds, and a time when humans and dragons had fought side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. There had been peace, harmony, and respect between the two species. Zarathus could almost feel the wind beneath his wings again. But then a dark shadow passed over those memories and everything changed. The images turned darker. Zarathus saw the betrayal. The humans, once allies, now turned against them, driven by greed and fear. The bond between dragons and humans shattered, and the world they had fought to protect was torn apart. The curse was cast and the dragons were bound, trapped in this frozen wasteland. Their strength slowly drained away. Zarathus let out a deep, rumbling growl, his mind flooded with the weight of those memories. The truth of their past, both the glorious and the painful, was now clear to him. Zivra's eyes snapped open. She too was lost in the memories. But hers were different. She saw the same battles, but she also saw something more personal, betrayal from within. Dragons who had once been family turned against them in fear, driven by jealousy and suspicion. It was not just the humans who had cast them aside. Their own kind had abandoned them too. "We were not just betrayed by humans," Zivra murmured, her voice filled with bitter understanding. "We were betrayed by our own." Zarathus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that truth. The curse had not only been cast by humans. It had been woven with hatred, fear, and distrust, both between humans and dragons and even within their own kind. That was why it was so strong. That was why it had lasted for so long. The stone pulsed again, brighter this time. The energy was building, and Zarathus could feel it pushing deeper into his very soul. It was urging him to remember, to understand, to accept what had happened. Zivra lifted her head, her eyes flashing with a sudden realization. The curse, it wasn't just a spell to trap us. It was meant to erase who we were, to strip us of our past, our power, our purpose. But we can't forget. We can't let them take that from us. Zarathus nodded slowly. No, we must remember. Only then can we break free. The human's voice was soft but steady. You both have the strength to face the truth. The curse was meant to erase you, but it can only work if you let it. It can only control you if you refuse to acknowledge what you were before. The two dragons looked at each other, and in that moment, they understood. The curse had only lasted because they had allowed it to. They had accepted their weakness, their pain, and had forgotten who they once were. They had forgotten the power they still carried inside them. But now they were remembering. Now they could reclaim what had been taken from them. With a deep, powerful breath, Zarathus stood. His muscles, stiff from years of disuse, groaned in protest, but the warmth from the stone seemed to give him strength. He stretched his wings, feeling the old power returning. His claws dug into the snow, and for the first time in a long while he felt alive. Zivra followed his lead, her wings unfurling slowly. The feeling of power long lost was returning to her as well. It was as though the very earth beneath them was awakening along with them. The curse that had bound them was losing its grip. The human watched them, their face calm but proud. "You're not just dragons anymore," they said quietly. "You are guardians. You are protectors. You were made to be more than this." Zarathus let out a roar, a sound that shook the ground beneath them. It was not a roar of anger or pain, but of triumph. For the first time in centuries, he felt free. Free from the curse, free from the pain. Free to be who he truly was. The magic that had bound them was fading, and with each passing second, the weight of the years lifted. Zivra joined in, her roar echoing through the valley. The two dragons stood tall, their heads held high, wings spread wide. The energy from the stone seemed to merge with them, flowing through their veins, reigniting the fire that had once burned so brightly. But the human was right. They were no longer just dragons. They were something greater, something more powerful than they had ever been before. The curse was breaking. They were free, and now they would rise. The valley was silent, but the air was electric with the energy of change. Zarathus and Zivra stood tall, their once dull scales now gleaming with newfound strength. The storm that had raged so fiercely around them had quieted, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. The snowflakes that had once fallen in a cold, endless dance now seemed to hang in the air like frozen sparks, suspended by the power the dragons were beginning to tap into once again. Zarathus stretched his wings, feeling the muscles strain for the first time in centuries. He flapped them experimentally, and a gust of wind rose beneath him. The ground trembled slightly as his enormous wings moved, stirring up the snow at his feet. A fire long forgotten burned in his chest, a fire that had once fueled him to soar across the skies and to protect all that he held dear. Zivra, standing beside him, did the same. She felt the power surging through her own body as her wings unfurled. It was like waking up after a long, painful sleep, her senses sharp and her muscles finally responding to her will. The curse that had drained her of everything was slipping away, and with it a sense of freedom she had thought was lost forever. The human stood a few paces back, watching them with a quiet expression of pride. They had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, they could not help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The dragons were awakening, and the curse that had bound them for so long was no longer holding them back. "You've done it," Zarathus said, his voice deep and resonant. It was full of awe and gratitude, but also something else, something unfamiliar to him after so many years of suffering. Hope. "You've freed us." The human nodded, but did not speak. They knew there was still more to be done. The curse had been broken, yes, but it was not enough to simply regain their strength. The dragons needed to remember who they had been, what they had lost, and what they were meant to protect. Zivra glanced at the human, her sharp eyes studying them. "We owe you our freedom," she said, her voice filled with both respect and curiosity. "But there is still much we don't understand. What is it that you want from us?" The human stepped forward, their face serious but kind. "I want nothing from you," they replied. "I came because I believed in your potential. I came because I knew that you were not meant to live like this, not like this." Zivra's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in them. "We were once great," she said softly, almost to herself. "But that was before the betrayal, before the curse," and the human nodded. "I know. But I also know that the dragons you were, the protectors, the guardians, still live inside you. You may have forgotten, but it's not too late. You can still reclaim your purpose." Zarathus looked up at the sky, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. It felt different now. The air was clearer, the world around him seemed brighter. The weight of the years was lifting, and the more he remembered, the more he could feel the fire within him growing stronger. He could remember what it had felt like to protect the land, to stand alongside the other dragons and fight for what was right. The human's words had triggered something deep within him, a realization that they had not been forgotten, that they still had a role to play in the world. "I remember," Zarathus said, his voice filled with a new strength. "We were guardians of the land. We protected the humans, the animals, the forests. We kept the balance. But that was before." Zivra completed the thought. "Before the betrayal." The human nodded again, their expression softening. "Yes, before the betrayal. But just because you were betrayed doesn't mean you have to give up on who you were. You don't have to carry the weight of the past anymore. You can choose to rise above it." Zarathus looked down at the stone that had started it all, the one that had broken the curse and restored their strength. It still glowed faintly, but it was no longer the source of their power. It had only unlocked what had always been there, what had always been a part of them. The dragon stretched his wings wide, feeling the energy of the world around him, the sky above him, the earth beneath him. He was free. And in that freedom he realized something even more important. He was no longer bound by the past. He could move forward. They both could. Zivra's voice broke through his thoughts. "We must return. We must take our place in the world again. There are things we need to fix, things we need to protect. We cannot hide in the mountains any longer." Zarathus turned to her, his expression filled with determination. "You're right. We were once protectors, but we abandoned that role. Now we have a chance to make things right." The humans smiled, their eyes full of understanding. "It won't be easy. The world has changed since you were last free. But you are strong and you are ready. Your time has come again." The dragons both felt it, the calling to rise, to return to their true purpose. They had been silent for so long, hidden away from the world. But now they were ready to stand tall once more. Zarathus let out a roar that echoed across the valley, a sound that carried with it both pain and triumph. It was a cry of release, of freedom, but also a promise that they would never again be prisoners of their past. Zivra joined in, her roar joining his in a powerful chorus that shook the very mountains around them. The world seemed to tremble in response, as if the land itself recognized the return of the dragons. The human watched them, their face filled with awe. "You've done it," they said quietly, their voice almost lost in the wind. "You've broken the curse, and now you've reclaimed your purpose." Zarathus turned to the human, his voice full of gratitude. "We will not forget what you've done for us. You've given us more than just strength, you've given us hope. We will rise again, and this time we will protect what we were meant to protect." Zivra nodded, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. "We will not be bound by our past any longer. We are dragons, and we will rise." With that, the two dragons spread their wings and took to the sky. The wind rushed beneath them as they soared higher and higher, their powerful wings cutting through the air. For the first time in centuries, they felt the freedom of flight once again. The world below them seemed small, but they were not concerned with it now. They had their purpose, and they would fulfill it. The human watched them rise, standing alone in the snow. They had done what they came to do. The dragons were free, and they would never be the same again. This part of the story highlights the dragons' reclamation of their power and purpose. The tension from the past is lifted, and the journey toward redemption begins. The human's role as a guide and helper is clear, and the dragons are finally prepared to re-enter the world as the protectors they once were. The tone is both hopeful and empowering, making it an exciting and fulfilling moment in the narrative. The dragons soared through the sky, their wings cutting through the air with power they hadn't felt in centuries. The mountains below, once a prison, now seemed like a distant memory. The world had opened up before them, vast and full of possibilities. As they flew, the wind beneath their wings felt like freedom itself, an energy they had not known since their time as protectors of the land. Zarathus led the way, his golden scales glistening in the light of the rising sun. His heart, once heavy with the weight of their curse, now beat with renewed strength. The storm that had kept him trapped for so long was gone, and in its place, there was clarity, a sense of purpose that had been lost for centuries. Zivra flew beside him, her dark wings spread wide, her eyes scanning the world below. The snow-covered peaks of the mountains were behind them now, but her thoughts were not entirely free from the past. She had seen betrayal from within her own kind, and the scars of that betrayal still lingered in her heart. But now she felt something new, hope. Hope that the world could be different, hope that they could protect what was still worth protecting. The human who had helped them, who had shown them the way to break their curse, watched from the ground below. They were a small figure against the vastness of the world, but their presence had been enough to set the dragons free. The human had guided them, not with force but with understanding, showing them that they could reclaim their place in the world. Zarathus's voice echoed in the sky as he called to Zivra. "Do you feel it, Zivra? The world has changed. It's not the same as it was before the betrayal, but we still have a role to play." Zivra's reply was filled with conviction. "I feel it. We're not the same either. We've changed too, and we're stronger for it." Together, the two dragons glided over the valleys and forests, their enormous wings casting shadows on the ground below. They were no longer bound by their past, and the weight of the curse no longer held them down. They had reclaimed their freedom, but more than that, they had found their purpose again. The human, still watching from below, felt a deep satisfaction. They had given the dragons the freedom to remember who they were, to rise above the curse that had trapped them for so long. But they knew the dragons' journey had only just begun. The world was waiting for them, and it wasn't going to be easy. The dragons had been gone for so long. The world had changed, and they would need to learn how to fit into it again. The old alliances were broken, and new dangers had emerged. But Zarathus and Zivra were not afraid. They had been through worse. Together they would face whatever the world threw at them. Their flight eventually brought them to the edge of a great forest, where the trees were tall and ancient, their branches reaching high into the sky. The forest had been a place of peace, but now it seemed to be on the brink of chaos. Zarathus landed first, his claws digging into the earth, sending a small tremor through the ground. Zivra followed closely behind, her landing graceful, though the earth still trembled beneath her weight. "We must protect this place," Zarathus said, his voice steady as he looked at the trees around them. "The forests have always been our allies. They are part of the land we swore to protect. Zivra nodded. The humans have changed the balance. Their greed and fear have begun to poison the land. The human, still watching from a distance, could feel the tension in the air. They had known this moment would come. The dragons were no longer just symbols of power and fear. They were protectors once again. But the world had changed, and the dragons would need to prove themselves all over again. The humans would need to see that they were not the enemies, but the guardians they had once been. As Zarathus and Zivra stood in the clearing, their eyes scanning the forest around them, a movement caught their attention. A group of humans appeared, their faces wary and fearful. They had heard the stories of dragons who had once ruled the skies and of the ancient curse that had trapped them for so long. Now the dragons were back, and the humans weren't sure whether to welcome them or fight them. Zivra's eyes narrowed as the humans approached. "They fear us," she muttered. "Do they not see that we have come to protect them?" Zarathus sighed. "Fear is all they know now, but we must prove ourselves." The humans stopped a few paces away, unsure of what to do. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture of caution. You are the dragons. The ones who were cursed." Zarathus nodded. "We were, but we are free now. We have come to help." The human leader took a step back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Help after all these years? How do we know we can trust you?" Zivra stepped forward, her wings slightly unfurled. "You don't have to trust us yet, but we have no desire to harm you. We were protectors once, and we can be again." The leader hesitated, glancing at his companions. They were all unsure, torn between their fear of the dragons and the possibility of something better. Finally, the leader spoke again, his voice soft but steady. "We've heard the stories, but we've also seen what your kind has done. We don't know if we can believe that you've changed." Zarathus took a deep breath, his voice strong. "We don't ask for your trust. We ask only for the chance to prove it. The world is changing, and we can help protect it, protect you." Zivra looked at the humans, then at Zarathus, and nodded. "We will show them, together." There was a long silence, and then the human leader lowered his hand. "We will watch. But know this, we will not forget your past. You will have to prove yourselves." Zarathus bowed his head in understanding. "We will, and we will not fail." With that, the dragons spread their wings once more and took to the sky. The human leader watched them as they flew, their powerful bodies cutting through the air with grace and strength. They had come back, and they had come with a promise. The dragons were no longer just creatures of legend. They were real, and they were determined to protect the world they had once ruled. As the dragons disappeared into the horizon, the human leader turned to his people. "The dragons are back," he said quietly. "We will have to see what that means for us." The world was changing, and both humans and dragons had to find their place in it again. The dragons were no longer at death's door. They had risen, and the world would never be the same.